Hey, what's going on, everybody? Isaac here with Civil Engineering Academy. I'm jumping on real quick because I've got another fun podcast episode for you, which you could subscribe to either here on YouTube. We produce those here. You can also jump on any podcatcher and grab an episode there as well. But today I interview Hannah Copeman. She is awesome. She is a structural engineer that went to University of Toronto and earned her bachelor's and master's degree. She's working for a nonprofit right now called One Community that works on sustainable infrastructure and is working on some cool projects with that nonprofit. She's also looking at other work opportunities, and so we discuss a lot of things that engineers go through, like, when you finish a bachelor's degree, should you go get work or should you finish your master's degree? What if you're struggling to find a job now? How do you move forward with your goals, in engineering? And we talked about some ups and downs that she had while going to college. We talked about women in engineering and tips and advice related to that, and just lots of good tips and tools and advice that I think you're really going to enjoy. Hannah was a great guest, and I think you're really going to like it. So with that introduction, we'll get right to the interview coming right up. All right, Hannah, thanks for coming on the Civil Engineering Academy podcast. How's it going?
All right, thanks Isaac for having me. It's going great. Excited for today.
Yeah. As we were talking a little bit earlier, I mentioned that it's always fun to have women in engineering come on the show because I think we need definitely more of them. And so it's fun to hear your experiences, kind of what you've gone through in school and how you started this whole journey. So
Mhm.
maybe as we dive into this, why don't you dive into how you got into engineering yourself? Why did you go
Sure.
that route?
So growing up, I always had a passion for art and math, and I didn't really know what engineering was until probably my sophomore, junior year of high school when I was studying for the ACT. And then I had a tutor who, conveniently at the same time, he was studying for his structural exam. So he was kind of telling me what that process is like and getting me a little bit more familiar with it. And then in one of the summers following, I did an intro to civil engineering course at Manhattan College, where, we did the typical build a bridge with popsicle sticks, some other exercises, and we got to go visit Thornton Tomasetti's office in Manhattan and see what they were working on, talk to some of the engineers there. So that really kind of solidified in my mind that this is something I could see myself doing. So
Oh,
then I got to U of T, University of Toronto in Canada, and did engineering there. And still, I kind of always had this side passion for art and architecture, but I wanted something a little bit more rigorous on the math and science side. So that's why I did civil primarily. But then I also did my master's and I focused on structural engineering at U of T. And so we had some electives there, and I reached out to the architecture program, the Master of Architecture program, Daniel's faculty, just to see if maybe I could use some of my electives there as courses in the architecture program. And so I did a couple proposals on both ends and ended up getting to do that too. So I kind of did merge it a little bit, and I definitely going forward still want to keep that structural engineering architecture integration career
mm-hmm.
going.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, so take me through, like, what was the decision to go to a University of Toronto versus like a university in New York or anything like that? How come,
Yeah.
why there versus here? I guess you're right on the border, but just curious how that thought process
Yeah.
happened.
So I grew up in Long Island, right outside of the city, and lived there my whole life. And my sister and I are both Canadian citizens. So she ended up going to McGill, which is in Montreal. And that kind of just like got my idea thinking about Canadian schools. So when it came time to visit everything, did my rounds, applied mostly to American schools, like 10 here and then just 2 in Canada. And I ended up going to visit her when I was in high school. And a lot of her friends were saying, oh, if you're interested in engineering or specifically civil, definitely check out University of Toronto since they're renowned for their engineering programs. So I went to visit that and ended up falling in love with the city and the school campus and just kind of wanted a different experience. I definitely didn't want to stay in New York. So at the end, I was between Berkeley and San Fran or
Hmm.
University of Toronto in Canada. So I'm either going west or I'm leaving the country.
Wow.
So I was like, I could see myself more staying in the US afterwards. So why not try Canada now? So
Okay.
that's what brought me there.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
So I guess just to go along with that thought process, what you want to get your PE license, I'm assuming, at some point, and so you're going to get that in the U.S. Take me
Yeah,
through that.
so I definitely want to get in the US eventually. The EIT engineering and training and PEng system in the US and Canada are slightly different, where in Canada for your EIT, once you graduate from an ABET accredited program, you can more so just apply for it. You don't have to take the FE. And similarly along the lines for the PEng, you don't have to take a rigorous testing of 6 to 8 hours. You still need the experiment experience, and that's a little bit heavier, but um, it's not as much as I don't want to knock the Canadian system at all, but the American system, it seems a little bit, you have to reach a little bit more of a qualification to get it. And I think I will definitely end up living in the United States and working here. So I want to
Okay,
transition back.
that's awesome.
Mhm.
So just I want to kind of harp on this a little bit, but take
Mhm.
me back through like college. How many women do you recall in classes with you? Was there a few? Was it just you? How many do you think there were?
So probably 30 to 40% of my class was female.
Wow, that's really high, I
It was
think.
hard. Yeah. So at U of T, they have all the different disciplines of, mechanical, industrial, engineering, science, chemical, civil. Civil and chemical were probably the two higher female percentages.
Hmm.
And then you get to electrical, maybe it was 10 to 15% female. So I definitely had a good group of female friends in my program, and it was very inclusive feeling. But when I got
Mm-hmm.
to my master's, there was significantly less females. Most of my friends were males there. It was probably closer to 20% female.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting to see that not as many females pursue it going higher in the education process.
And do you have any advice for women that want to get into engineering? Like any experiences that you had, or tips, or anything to go along that to help them?
Yeah, I mean, it's the program accepts whoever's qualified. So if this is a passion that you have or something you're interested in, definitely follow it and pursue. And, if you ended up getting into one of these programs and still kind of feel like you don't belong, or maybe that you have this preconception that the men should somehow, be better at this or be more qualified, then there are so many female engineering groups available, like Society of Women Engineers, virtually at every campus. And in my graduate program, I helped co-found a group for graduate students in engineering. So there are just so many opportunities for female engineers to be in groups and to talk about what they're feeling, or to make other networking and professional development activities and
Mm.
events. So if you get into the program, there's definitely a female engineer group to be found.
Okay.
So I would say, you might have a nerve about it, but once you get in, you'll see, like, if you belong, then, I mean, no, not even if you belong, like, if you try, you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I remember when I was going to school, I had a group of probably four good study friends, and it was like 25%. One was a girl, and so
Mhm.
and that probably was the same as the classes that I took. So it's nice to see that percentage is getting higher. That's good.
Definitely.
Well, that's great. So take me, where are you today? What are you doing now?
So right now I'm working for a nonprofit organization called One Community. And this organization, they focus on building sustainable cities. They're still in proposal phase right now. We're working on open sourcing all of our documents.
Hmm.
So they're mainly trying to tackle the infrastructure industry going forward. It's 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are from infrastructure, construction, and operations. So here, these small communities where they're housing 200 to 300 residences, they're entirely self-sufficient, net zero energy. They're harvesting rainwater for irrigation, using vermiculture technique for wastewater. So that's what I'm
Wow.
helping on right now. I'm on the civil structural team, so I'm helping to design the domes that people will be living in. So they kind of house 1 to 2 people. They're Lancet arch shapes,
Hmm.
and they're not built out of steel and concrete. They're built out of earth bags. So this is
Wow.
earth or soil, basically filled in polypropylene bags, and they're wrapped around, and these make the walls. And then they're maintained together with barbed wire, which kind of creates the tension ring. So we're focusing on these our structure, but also exploring aircrete as another option. So for anyone who doesn't know, aircrete is a mixture of water, cement, and foam. So basically aerated concrete, and it has more entrained air, which makes it more lightweight and a higher R value, so better insulative properties. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of reverting a bit back to the vernacular architecture where they're using, adobe homes that focus on passive heating systems.
Mm.
So these are in proposal phases, and we're working on getting funding in a couple of years and hoping to maybe build one out. Actually, in Utah, we're thinking for the first one.
Really? Well,
Yeah,
that's where I'm at. So you got to show
yeah,
me those
exactly.
when you come up with them.
That'd be awesome.
You know what you should do, and I haven't seen this, but on your LinkedIn profile, you can
Mhm.
add images of stuff you're working on, and that would be,
Oh, I totally should. Yeah, because it
yeah,
is a little bit hard to conceptualize.
you should put those on there so people can see what you're working on. Wow, that sounds awesome. You'll have to stay in touch. Since I'm in Utah,
Yeah,
I
maybe
can
you could
check
be in
these
one.
out, take some pictures.
Will do.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Going through work now that you're working, and even through school, has there been ever a lesson that you've learned? Have you made any mistakes yet that you could share with us? Something that you've learned?
Yeah, so I think most lesson learned for me throughout undergrad was, don't think that just because you excelled in high school or could even be your previous degree, that engineering will just be another kind of walk in the park or minimal effort given. For me personally, I had to give a lot to get there. And don't think that just because you didn't succeed in your or excel to the degree that you'd hoped for in your first 2 years or first year, that your path can't change. In my first 2 years, it was definitely a transition, moving to a new city, a new country, not knowing anyone in the city, trying to regain a social life, just understand like how my new life was going to be there, what amenities, and at the same time having a couple deaths in the family where I had to travel back to New York. So my
Mm.
head wasn't really like fully engaged, I'll say. And the first 2 years of engineering, it was a lot of general courses. So chemical, computer science, materials. So stuff that I wasn't truly interested in the beginning. I went for civil. But then in third year, I really started to get my grind. So just kind of like it solidified to me later that, just keep trying. And if you just keep working hard, engineering definitely gets better along the way as it gets more specific and you can start to choose which courses you want to be in and actually, you're engaged because you're actually interested in this material. So,
Mm.
and definitely hard work along the way. It always goes noticed. If you're the student, the B student who's always at the TA's office hours, or even in work, if you're the person who's staying an extra hour longer, I've always found that that definitely doesn't go unnoticed.
Wow. So how did you keep balanced with all these events happening in your family's life? Sounds like you've had some deaths. That's really sad to hear about. But how are you able to like stay focused? How did you march forward?
So the first 2 years, I gotta say, I was not very focused.
Yeah.
Just kind of, giving it my all where I can. But um, I think it was like I really needed to just sit down and figure out what my study habits were and how they would change going into a new program and learning with a new system. But definitely friends really help a lot, because your peers are kind of going through this together too. A lot more of them are in the same boat than you might think. So I think just like talking it through with people and really just trying to find your rhythm. Like I think you kind of have to test out a couple different things to see like how you are going to excel or what's going to keep you most level
Yeah.
um, and trying to find just some other activities that you can do to blow steam off in the meantime, be a sport or hanging out with people.
Yeah. Life is can throw some curveballs at you for
Yeah.
sure. And when you're in college, um, I think it's easy to let some of those things really slow you down. So I admire, the determination that you had. I remember when I actually was in college, one of the really good study buddies that we had came to school one day out of the blue, and he had these really deep bruises on his legs. And he was explaining to us that he thinks he had a blood deficiency of some sort, and he was going to get it checked on. Anyway, the next day he found out he actually had leukemia, and he was
Oh my
gone like
gosh.
that week. It happened so fast. And so,
Wow.
you know, struggles, they're not picky. They happen to everybody, but
Yeah.
I admire the determination to keep moving forward, and that's just kind of what you got to do. So
Mhm.
that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you've touched upon a project that you've worked on, that you've studied, or that you're working on now. It sounds like that's one of your favorites to work on. Is that true? Is there any other favorite projects that you've worked on that you would like to share about too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely most engrossed in the sustainable community life right now. But other favorite topic project I've worked on was in my second semester of my master degree, I took a course on seismic and earthquake engineering. And this was always something that I was interested in, but in undergrad, we didn't really have any courses available. And then throughout my internship experiences in New York, it wasn't something that we really focused on in design, since it's just not that much of a concern here as it is like out west or in Asia. But then had the opportunity to take this course. So that was a great opportunity. And we focused on concrete and steel seismic resisting systems. And the project culminated, or the term culminated in a project that was to design a 6-story office building in Vancouver with steel reinforcing systems. So we did moment resisting frames and buckling restrained brace frames. And this whole course and project was just very interesting and something I really enjoyed. So I think going forward, something that I would definitely want to try and incorporate or be involved in my career.
Good. That's great.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you a couple short answer, or I mean, you could take as long as you want, but I would just kind of
Okay.
want run through some questions with you. What was your biggest obstacle that you faced when you became a civil engineer? Was it school? Is it studying for these exams now? What do you think has been the biggest obstacle?
Mm. So definitely like not finding my rhythm until
Okay.
third year. Um, that was a little bit of a mental hurdle to kind of like get my ball rolling. Yeah, studying for the FE right now. Luckily, like your podcast and website, and there are so many resources out there. So that's going okay for now.
Good.
Another one that may not be such an obstacle, but a debate that really weighed heavily was the debate between going to work right after undergrad or going into master's.
Mm,
Is something. So getting into the end of undergrad, I had a job lined up with the company that I'd interned at in New York the summer before. But then I kind of got thinking about masters, and I just applied to give myself an option. And then when I got in, it was the debate of, okay, start working, and then if you want to do masters later, you'll have more real world working experience, and you'll probably get more out of your masters, and you'll be able to ask more questions that are personal, that you understand more. Or on the other side, go into masters right away, and so you keep the flow going of school and you kind of stay in the rhythm. And I talked to a lot of different people about it because I was just, probably either one's fine. But talked to my tutor who from high school ACT, who's now been a mentor to me throughout the years, and my professors and some colleagues from work. And so that one, it was like, you kind of have to see what works for you. Like, since I know it took me a while to get into a flow, I was like, I'm going to keep this one rolling for a little bit. But that was definitely something that really took me a while to figure out.
that's great advice. I think every engineer has to go through this
Mhm.
same decision making process. Once they graduate with your 4-year bachelor's degree, whether they go out into the world and get work, or and then get the master's later, or some even bag the master's altogether,
Yeah.
just like they don't know what they want. I
Mhm.
had the same thing, and I was like, oh man, so do I, go to work for 2 years? How much, then my engineering brain started going off, and I'm like, how long would that take to earn back?
Yeah,
If
and
I
the
got a
money that
master's
you
degree,
too.
stuff like that. So I actually did the opposite. So when I
Okay.
graduated, I got a job, but the problem with that is that it's extremely hard to get back into the engineering,
That's what I was
into
worried about.
school. And so once you start working, it's like it just gets more difficult to get back into it.
Mhm.
And so I did go back and finally get my master's, but it was years after I had graduated with my bachelor's degree. So,
Did you regret not going right into it, or you think it was fine
looking
anyway?
back, I wish I had started earlier. I did actually. So, that maybe that's good advice for people that are struggling with that decision right now a little bit.
Mhm.
It's best to get it over with as soon as
That's what I thought.
possible.
Let's just knock it out.
Yes, knock it out, because then, life happens, and,
Yeah,
you know,
and there
all
are
of a
so
sudden you
many.
have twin daughters like I have, and this gets really hard to get into school.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
good advice.
Thank you.
Um, let's talk about this. Do you have any personal habits that you feel like contributed to your success in becoming an engineer?
Yeah, so one for me is just kind of really planning your goals and being disciplined about it. But this really starts like day to day. So whenever I'm working, either the night before or morning of, I'll just jot down what I definitely want to accomplish for the day, maybe what I want to accomplish in the week or the month, and kind of write those in. Um, but there's just such an associated satisfaction I get when I physically cross it off. Like the brain release of dopamine for feel good satisfaction. It's like that's something I look forward
You
to.
did it.
Um, yeah, and I mean, you could write it like, a note on your phone or on your computer, but I definitely like the physical writing of it. And it's just nice to, be able to really see that you're letting things go, and you can physically see that you've crossed something off your mental agenda. But also at the same time, I think it's very important to make sure that the goals you're setting are realistic, because if you're writing them down, you get excited and you're going to accomplish X and Y and Z, but you know they're kind of big, and it'll be more of a surprise to you if you accomplish them, but there's more of a probability that you won't.
Hmm.
Don't try to set yourself up for this failure. Like, make them realistic, and also try and set some time in where you're not doing work 24/7.
That's great. That's great advice too. Um, what do you think, I guess, has been the best advice you've received going through all of this?
So back in first year, we had a course on Intro to Engineering, which was just the welcome to university life engineering. And it was a course where everyone is on their computer, on their phone. No one's really paying attention.
Hmm.
And I definitely was not always paying attention, but luckily this one time I was. And the professor said, whatever you're doing, do it with 100% intention. And I didn't really understand what that meant fully until, again, in my third year, where it was, if you're studying or you're working, don't have your phone on the side and be messaging people or checking social media or watching a movie at the same time. Be fully engrossed in what you're doing. And then on the flip side, when you're taking a break, whether it's playing a sport, hanging out with people, watching a movie, do that 100% too. Don't be engaged in that activity and be thinking about or stressing about the work that you have to do, because you're just kind of wasting your time there. You're not fully engaging. And to fully
Yeah,
recharge in one activity, I really find that you need to fully engage in the other to come back with a fresh mind.
that's great advice. I've always heard it being called, and I can't remember the name of the book, but they called that deep work, like when you get in the mindset
Yes.
when you're actually doing something, getting away from all those distractions and
Yeah.
focusing on actually moving the needle in what you're
It's
doing. So,
hard to separate it. Like,
oh yeah,
I need to make an effort there.
yes, that's for sure. Great advice. What about a resource that you think you could recommend to the audience, or is there a book, a software, anything that you have found useful that maybe you could share with us?
Yeah, so recently I was introduced to the book called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. I don't know
Hmm.
if you're familiar with it,
I have
but
heard of it.
so it's for those who haven't, a simple parable with two men and two mice, and they're in a maze and they're looking for the cheese. So the maze and the cheese are both metaphors, with the cheese being what your goal is in life. So, or goal in the moment, which is a job promotion, getting into this school, or saving money for a car. And then the maze is how you plan to get there and what life is throwing you along the way. So the two men and the two mice, they work very hard in the beginning, and they're running through the maze, and they all find where the cheese is. And the men, they get very comfortable in it, and they go back every day knowing where it is and feeling comfortable with the copious amounts of cheese that they have, not really paying attention to everything around them. Whereas the mice start to realize that the cheese source is depleting. And one day they all get back to where the cheese is in the maze. And of course, the cheese is gone. Who moved their
Mm.
cheese? So the mice don't think twice about it. They just leave and they go and find the new spot that it is. But the men really have a hard time wrapping their heads around it. Like, how could this happen to me? I had all this cheese here. Who took it? Why would they take it? And they start to starve and get frustrated. And they think that, the longer that they sit there and the more frustrated they get and the more they talk about their frustration, that the cheese will probably just come back. But it doesn't, of course. And finally, they reach their nirvana moment, or maybe just coupled with starvation of, okay, life moved on and so should they. So it kind of just highlights that, like, if change is happening in your life, try and take control of your situation and don't let the change take control of you. Like, changing, it's not always losing something. Hopefully it's gaining something and something different for the better. So it's really, if your cheese gets moved, stop wondering who moved your cheese and just try to go find it.
That's
So,
great.
and this was like really great to hear during the pandemic. In the spring, I had a couple interviews lined up for jobs to start in September, and they went really well. And I finished like full round of interviews with a couple companies. And then when I'm in the period of waiting to hear if I got it or not, they both said they were having a global hiring freeze. So like, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty in the pandemic, and there still is. So that's very understandable. But it kind of took me a while. I was like, okay, maybe they'll reopen it in a couple months. Maybe it'll be back for September, but that didn't happen and hasn't happened for a lot of companies. So
Mm.
kind of took me a while to wrap my head around that. And, okay, take this opportunity to study for the lead green associate, start studying for the FE, jump into work with the nonprofit. So just find other ways to find your cheese, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Yeah, the pandemic is really people that are kind of in that transition where you're at, trying to find a job. A lot of companies have put a hiring freeze on, and I know other industries, depending on what you're wanting to go in, are still hiring, but it really depends on what you're kind of going into.
It
But
does.
I love that you're determined to not let that stop you from still moving forward with what you want to do in life, and that's fantastic advice. So if
We'll
anyone
see what
has,
happens.
yeah, that's great. You're still moving forward, so that's great.
Mm.
So I love that. This is a fun one I like to ask, but if you had all the resources in the world, what's something that you would like to develop or be a part of in the world of civil engineering? And I think you've probably hit on some of that, but why don't you tell me?
Okay. So if all the resources were available, I would love to help build new habitats and terraform Mars, Moon, or whichever body out there is most suitable for human life. And this isn't such an esoteric idea. My favorite architect, Bjarke Engels, who is based out of Copenhagen,
Mm-hmm.
he began working on this project with United Arab Emirates in 2017 called Mars Science City, where they are trying to colonize Mars. And they kind of have tentative plans for in around 100 years from now that they want to start this. And they're talking about soon building a prototype in the desert outside of Dubai to try and mimic Mars climate conditions. So I just think it'd be incredibly interesting to
Wow.
explore what different building techniques, such as like 3D printing, inflatable structures, for living habits that need to withstand the Martian heat and radiation levels.
Mm.
And specifically for structural engineers, the gravity on Mars is a third of what it is here on Earth. So that means slimmer columns, longer beam spans, and overall just helping create like Martian vernacular architecture, a
That's
new
great.
planet, new rules. Like, I think that'd just be the coolest thing ever.
New codes for
Yeah.
Mars
Yeah. Like, what are the
construction.
codes? Yeah.
That's crazy. That would be awesome. I remember seeing a video, and I can't remember where, but I think it was Qatar that they were building a sustainable. I don't know if it was a whole city or whatnot, but that what you said just kind of brought to my memory people trying to make this stuff uh, as we have it today, so we can get there. So it's going to be interesting times where we're going to be, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road in life and what's
Yeah,
available. That's
they are
awesome.
exploring like all these different biodomes and how they can make it self-sustaining without having ever to leave the dome. So it's a lot of interesting ideas being put forward.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I have really appreciated you coming onto the podcast. Is there any last piece of guidance that you would like to share with the Civil Engineering Academy audience, Hannah?
Sure. Just trust yourself and really try not to compare yourself to others. You know, if you know what you want, like go for it and try not to let how other people are getting there or what their path is affect you. Once you get your ball rolling, it is very empowering and great feeling. So just, trust yourself, and if you want it, go for it. So I think that's just the
Great.
last great advice to have.
And if somebody had questions that, they were listening to this and they wanted to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I'm available on LinkedIn and Facebook, both just at my name. And I would love to connect with anyone who wants to talk about anything in the industry or any opportunities, questions. Yeah, definitely
Okay.
reach out.
And she's studying for the FE right now. So,
Yeah, if you have tips,
do a
reach
little
out.
group study. Sounds great. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Isaac.
All right. Bye. We are live. Still waking up. I'm going to get some water. Holy cow. I got my water. It'll be good. You see me okay? Yeah.